Hey guys, tonight we slip into a place where the night sky hangs vast and unbroken, stretched above flat plains that shimmer with silence. You're standing barefoot on dry soil that still holds a hint of the day's heat, and above you, the stars look like they've been poured out of some overturned jar, scattered across a black velvet cloth. Out here in Mesopotamia, the very cradle of civilization, the darkness feels different, like it's hiding secrets you're not entirely supposed to overhear. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week out here without a guide. The rivers flood unpredictably, neighbors argue with spears instead of words, and your sandals would wear out faster than your patience does so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see this little global campfire we've built together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift your gaze from the constellations above to the land around you. It's a broad plain, baked by day, cooled by night, and crisscrossed by irrigation channels that glitter faintly in the starlight. The faint croak of frogs rises from the water, along with the hum of insects. To your left, a shepherd murmurs to his sheep, the occasional bell clinking as the flock huddles close. The air smells faintly of clay, smoke, and something earthy, like the ghost of the day's harvest still clings to the breeze. This is Mesopotamia, literally the land between the rivers, though you can't yet see them. What you do feel is their pull, their unseen gravity shaping everything here. The fertile plain owes its existence to those mighty waters, and without them, this night would not contain villages, temples, or people at all. It would be just another desert. Mainstream historians agree. The predictable flood and drain cycles of the Tigris and Euphrates gave rise to farming, which in turn birthed the first real cities. Still, historians argue whether those cycles were truly predictable or more like cosmic roulette, forcing humans to invent calendars and rituals just to cope. Either way, you can almost sense how every furrow in the field, every mud brick stacked in a wall, bends its story back to those rivers the quirky thought floats in as you shuffle through the dust. Somewhere, under this very sky, some ancient villager once smeared crocodile dung on their skin as sunscreen. Yes, really, not your first choice at the beach, but it was considered practical. The night seems to chuckle at that, as if the stars themselves remember human oddities far better than human victories. You walk on, past a line of low walls, mud brick darkened by the shadows. A dog barks once and then thinks better of it. The silence returns, thick and soft. You notice the ground is littered with shards, little chips of pottery glowing pale in the moonlight. Every step crunches with the ghosts of yesterday's broken cups and cooking pots. This place is old enough that trash becomes archaeology, and you are crunching through tomorrow's museum displays. Somewhere ahead, a faint flame glimmers. An oil lamp, maybe two, set outside a home. You hear laughter drift out, the sound of children fighting sleep, voices carrying warmth into the cool air. You're tempted to approach, but you know the people here are suspicious of strangers at night. Better to admire from afar, breathing in the smoky tang of sesame oil burning low and steady. The sky presses closer, filled with constellations that don't yet have the names you know. These people are already watching them though, making stories out of pinpricks, searching for guidance in their slow wheel across the heavens. You tilt your head back and almost feel their curiosity brush against yours, like time is less a straight line and more a shared circle. And here's another debate. Was Mesopotamia truly the birthplace of writing, or just one of several competing cradles of literacy? Egypt, the Indus Valley, even China, each claims an ancient script. But as you crunch over those pottery shards, you can almost hear the soft scratch of a reed stylus somewhere nearby, pressing wedge-shaped signs into wet clay. For now, you just know you're walking through a world that is scribbling its first notes to the future. The night deepens, and a breeze stirs. You pull your cloak, or what passes for it, closer, feeling the chill of the plain. Somewhere in the darkness, a jackal yips, answered by another. It's both eerie and comforting. They were here long before you, and they'll probably outlast you too. You keep moving, following the faint curve of a canal. The water is black and glistening, carrying reflected starlight like liquid silver. A frog leaps, plopping back with a splash. And just beyond the edge of your vision, you know there are fields, already sown with barley and wheat, their furrows cut straight and narrow. In a few weeks, they'll rise green against this brown backdrop, proof that humans dared to challenge the desert. And sometimes even as you stand there, toes just brushing the damp mud of the bank, you realize this plain, flat, endless, shimmering, was once the stage where humanity learned to settle down, to build, to dream. And tonight, under the wide sky, you're only a guest, drifting through echoes that never truly fade. The air shifts as you wander farther into the open plain, and though the stars remain brilliant above, a new sound hums in the distance: water. At first, it's only a hush, like wind brushing over reeds, but as you step closer you feel the earth beneath your feet growing softer, damper, alive. Then, with a faint glimmer of reflected starlight, the dark ribbon of a river opens before you. This is no ordinary stream. It is one of the great veins of Mesopotamia, the river that bleeds life into an otherwise unforgiving land. You crouch low at the bank, watching ripples catch the light, and you realize, without this steady current, every field, every village, and every whispered story you've stumbled through tonight would vanish into dust. The Mesopotamians themselves certainly understood this. They called their world the land between rivers, and they weren't exaggerating. The twin giants, the Tigris and the Euphrates, were both blessing and menace. Each year they flooded, depositing silt so rich it seemed like the soil itself had been sharpened into a tool. Crops sprang from it: barley, wheat, dates, even flax for weaving. You picture villagers bending over furrows by day, planting in rhythmic lines, then gathering by night around steaming pots of stew, their survival made possible by the water now lapping at your toes. Mainstream history teaches us that this fertile crescent was the very reason humans decided to give up wandering and stay put. It wasn't a choice born of laziness. It was a gamble on rivers. And yet, historians still argue whether these floods were predictable blessings or chaotic disasters. Some say the rivers ran like clockwork, inspiring the first calendars, while others claim the Tigris especially behaved like a caffeinated toddler, flooding when you least expected, destroying villages, washing away carefully laid irrigation. Standing here in the cool midnight, you can almost feel both truths tugging at you. The mud by your sandals is generous, but its generosity can easily flip into cruelty that a quirky tidbit slides into your sleepy brain. To control these floods, villagers built early levees, dikes, and channels. And somewhere along the way, clever farmers discovered that fish stranded in irrigation ditches could be scooped up with bare hands. Picture it, one of humanity's first versions of fast food, though with a bit more slime than a modern drive-through burger. You chuckle softly. The frog chorus along the riverbank seems to join in. You lean back, looking across the wide current. The river is too dark to see the far shore clearly, but you sense it stretching into mystery. Traders will float by in daylight, their reed boats heavy with grain or jars of date wine. At night, the current is a lullaby, dragging thoughts downstream. Even the stars seem to lean into the water's rhythm. You can imagine ancient astronomers standing right where you are, noting how reflections shiver and align, trying to match the heavens above with the currents below. Further down the bank, you notice something odd: stakes driven into the mud, tied with knotted reeds. These are markers, early measurements of the river's moods. Someone will check them at dawn, noting whether the water rose or fell overnight. That small act of observation is more than simple curiosity. It's science in its infancy. You trace the stake with your fingers, sticky with damp clay, and realize you're touching the prototype of forecasting. No satellites, no apps, just reed sticks and mud. And yet the purpose is the same. Will it flood tomorrow? The air carries new smells here. Brine and algae, sure, but also a whiff of roasted fish drifting from some unseen fire farther inland. Your stomach grumbles. Maybe someone stayed awake late, salting their catch for storage. Preservation was vital here. Without fridges, Mesopotamians turned to drying and salting, hoping their food would last through fickle seasons. The night breeze reminds you of that ancient anxiety. Feast and famine never lived far apart. The ground trembles faintly as a herd of cattle shifts nearby, restless under the stars. Their hooves squish into mud, leaving prints that will probably harden by morning into fossils of daily life. You run your hand along a reed clump, its blades sharp enough to slice skin, and imagine bundling these into mats, boats, even writing instruments. The river doesn't just feed mouths. It builds tools, shelters, and stories as the night deepens. You spot a faint glow upstream, a torch bobbing along a small craft. Someone is night fishing, throwing nets into the current. You hold your breath as the boat creaks closer, then slips away, its torch trailing like a firefly. You marvel at the trust it takes to sit on this river at midnight, knowing crocodiles and snakes may lurk just below the surface. And yes, there were crocodiles here in ancient days, especially farther south toward the marshes. Imagine balancing in a reed canoe, praying your homemade sunscreen isn't also tonight's bait. The water murmurs constantly, a soundtrack to Mesopotamian life. You listen, and behind the rush you think you hear voices, generations chanting hymns, reciting harvest tallies, whispering prayers into the flow. The river carried not only silt and fish, but also meaning. Ritual washings, offerings tossed into the current, even messages imagined to travel downstream to the gods. This is no ordinary riverbank. It's the world's first postal system, the divine inbox that jackal pads down the opposite bank, glancing at you before disappearing into reeds. Its shadow ripples across the water like a warning. Nature still rules here. No matter how many canals humans cut, how many levees they raise, the rivers remain in charge. You feel both humbled and oddly soothed. The cool mist kisses your cheeks as you close your eyes, letting the sound envelop you. This is Mesopotamia breathing. Inhale with the flood, exhale with the drought. The twin rivers stretch on endlessly, and you drift with them, carried forward to the next part of the journey, just as humanity itself once was. You trudge onward from the riverbank, feeling the night air shift again as you approach the first hints of settlement. Mud brick homes rise like sleepy sentinels from the plain, their flat roofs catching the starlight and glowing faintly against the deep black sky. The scent of baked clay and smoldering hearths hits you first, warm, comforting, faintly smoky. Someone nearby laughs quietly, the sound bouncing off walls, mixing with the occasional bark of a dog and the croak of frogs near the irrigation channels. You realize that life, in all its small, intimate moments, is already pulsing here. You're walking among the very first villages, the building blocks of urban life, and the world feels both familiar and impossibly distant. Inside one home, a lamp flickers, illuminating woven mats and clay pots stacked against walls. Smoke curls from a tiny stove where barley stew bubbles gently. You can almost taste it. Imagine the rich aroma of lentils, onions, and tiny morsels of meat simmered slowly over the night fire. Children are curled under woven blankets, murmuring in half-sleep, and an older sibling nudges them awake with a soft whisper to help serve dinner. You marvel at the ordinary chaos of domesticity, the same kind of chaos that would echo across thousands of years into kitchens you'll know in your own time. Mainstream historians emphasize that these villages were the crucibles of culture. Here, people were learning to cooperate, share resources, and resolve conflicts. But historians still argue whether social hierarchies emerged because of practical needs or human vanity. Were leaders chosen out of necessity or sheer ego? You wander past a courtyard where footprints are pressed into the wet mud, evidence of past chores, games, and disputes, and the debate suddenly feels alive. Quirkier details jump out at you as your eyes adjust to the dim light. Someone has scattered bits of pottery outside the doorway, broken shards of cups or bowls, each perhaps once holding beer or date wine. Archaeologists today speculate that these fragments might have been used for divination. Throwing shards and interpreting patterns could foretell harvest outcomes or warn of impending floods. You crouch to pick up a shard, tracing the smooth curves of its rim, imagining it once cradled a bitter, foamy drink. Beer, after all, was practically a staple, and not just for nourishment. Sometimes it doubled as a mildly intoxicating social lubricant, sparking conversation, laughter, and even minor arguments over who owed whom a drink. You wander past narrow alleyways, feeling the warm breath of night escaping through cracks in mud brick walls. Laundry hangs from rough wooden poles, swaying slightly in the breeze, and you glimpse small household idols tucked into niches, tiny clay figures watching over sleep. Gods lived everywhere here, even in the simplest homes, protecting children, livestock, and grains. Some households might have had a miniature ziggurat atop the roof, a personal connection to the towering temples you glimpsed from afar, bringing the divine close enough to touch. The village hums with nocturnal life. Chickens squawk from enclosures, rats scuttle over the edges of rooftops, and someone pounds grains on a small mortar to make flour for tomorrow's bread. You notice faint footprints of neighbors walking to their wells, each step leaving an imprint in the soft mud, tiny signatures of their daily routines. A curious thought strikes you. For all the technological sophistication of their irrigation canals and levees, it's these small, tactile acts, kneading, pounding, carrying water, that define daily survival. You pause to listen. A woman's voice rises briefly, singing a lullaby to coax her child to sleep. The melody is simple, but it carries centuries of human experience, the same comfort that countless parents have offered across generations. Historians still argue whether such songs were meant purely for comfort or also served as mnemonic devices, encoding oral history and legal traditions in tune. Either way, the effect is immediate. Your eyelids feel heavier. Out in the courtyard, someone tends a small fire, the flame dancing across clay pots. Shadows flicker against walls, stretching the night into long, undulating shapes. You notice that children have been playing a game with stones, rolling them across smooth mud patches in competitions that probably existed for as long as humans have had boredom and imagination. In a quiet corner, a cat slinks by, tail twitching, its silhouette cutting a perfect, fluid line. You grin at the timelessness of it all. This small, messy, joyful human activity, unchanged in essence even millennia later. The sudden breeze carries the scent of baking bread from a nearby oven. You inhale deeply, letting it mingle with the smoky tang of torches and the earthy aroma of wet clay. It's grounding, almost hypnotic. And yet, a hint of danger lingers. Stray dogs bark, small fires smolder dangerously, and you remember that even simple domesticity in ancient villages carried risks. The night deepens further. From a rooftop, a figure peers down, scanning the streets. Perhaps a young boy, perhaps a guard, perhaps someone curious about your presence. You wonder whether villagers ever contemplated outsiders sneaking through the dark like you are now, or whether they simply accepted the quiet, trusting the rhythm of river, hearth, and sky to keep them safe. You wander past sleeping livestock, the low murmur of animals blending seamlessly with distant water. Every sense is alive. The smell of burning oil, the soft crunch of mud underfoot, the faint rustle of wind through reed mats. Somewhere nearby, a dog yawns loudly. It sounds startlingly human in its melancholy. You realize that even in the simplest corners of the world, life insists on its drama and humor, its anxiety and comfort, and you are only a visitor, tracing steps written long ago that a final glance at the village before you moves on reveals torches still flickering, shadows stretching across the mud walls, and children murmuring dreams into the dark. You inhale, tasting the cool night air thick with smoke, and step away from the hearths, carrying the warmth and whispers with you as the plain widens again. You are alone with the night, yet profoundly not alone at all. You trudge onward from the riverbank, feeling the night air shift again as you approach the first hints of settlement. Mud brick homes rise like sleepy sentinels from the plain, their flat roofs catching the starlight and glowing faintly against the deep black sky. The scent of baked clay and smoldering hearths hits you first, warm, comforting, faintly smoky. Someone nearby laughs quietly, the sound bouncing off walls, mixing with the occasional bark of a dog and the croak of frogs near the irrigation channels. You realize that life, in all its small, intimate moments, is already pulsing here. You're walking among the very first villages, the building blocks of urban life, and the world feels both familiar and impossibly distant. Inside one home, a lamp flickers, illuminating woven mats and clay pots stacked against walls. Smoke curls from a tiny stove where barley stew bubbles gently. You can almost taste it. Imagine the rich aroma of lentils, onions, and tiny morsels of meat simmered slowly over the night fire. Children are curled under woven blankets, murmuring in half-sleep, and an older sibling nudges them awake with a soft whisper to help serve dinner. You marvel at the ordinary chaos of domesticity, the same kind of chaos that would echo across thousands of years into kitchens you'll know in your own time. Mainstream historians emphasize that these villages were the crucibles of culture. Here, people were learning to cooperate, share resources, and resolve conflicts. But historians still argue whether social hierarchies emerged because of practical needs or human vanity. Were leaders chosen out of necessity or sheer ego? You wander past a courtyard where footprints are pressed into the wet mud, evidence of past chores, games, and disputes, and the debate suddenly feels alive. Quirkier details jump out at you as your eyes adjust to the dim light. Someone has scattered bits of pottery outside the doorway, broken shards of cups or bowls, each perhaps once holding beer or date wine. Archaeologists today speculate that these fragments might have been used for divination. Throwing shards and interpreting patterns could foretell harvest outcomes or warn of impending floods. You crouch to pick up a shard, tracing the smooth curves of its rim, imagining it once cradled a bitter, foamy drink. Beer, after all, was practically a staple, and not just for nourishment. Sometimes it doubled as a mildly intoxicating social lubricant, sparking conversation, laughter, and even minor arguments over who owed whom a drink. You wander past narrow alleyways, feeling the warm breath of night escaping through cracks in mud brick walls. Laundry hangs from rough wooden poles, swaying slightly in the breeze, and you glimpse small household idols tucked into niches, tiny clay figures watching over sleep. Gods lived everywhere here, even in the simplest homes, protecting children, livestock, and grains. Some households might have had a miniature ziggurat atop the roof, a personal connection to the towering temples you glimpsed from afar, bringing the divine close enough to touch. The village hums with nocturnal life. Chickens squawk from enclosures, rats scuttle over the edges of rooftops, and someone pounds grains on a small mortar to make flour for tomorrow's bread. You notice faint footprints of neighbors walking to their wells, each step leaving an imprint in the soft mud, tiny signatures of their daily routines. A curious thought strikes you. For all the technological sophistication of their irrigation canals and levees, it's these small, tactile acts, kneading, pounding, carrying water, that define daily survival. You pause to listen. A woman's voice rises briefly, singing a lullaby to coax her child to sleep. The melody is simple, but it carries centuries of human experience, the same comfort that countless parents have offered across generations. Historians still argue whether such songs were meant purely for comfort or also served as mnemonic devices, encoding oral history and legal traditions in tune. Either way, the effect is immediate. Your eyelids feel heavier. Out in the courtyard, someone tends a small fire, the flame dancing across clay pots. Shadows flicker against walls, stretching the night into long, undulating shapes. You notice that children have been playing a game with stones, rolling them across smooth mud patches in competitions that probably existed for as long as humans have had boredom and imagination. In a quiet corner, a cat slinks by, tail twitching, its silhouette cutting a perfect, fluid line. You grin at the timelessness of it all, this small, messy, joyful human activity. Unchanged in essence, even millennia later, the sudden breeze carries the scent of baking bread from a nearby oven. You inhale deeply, letting it mingle with the smoky tang of torches and the earthy aroma of wet clay. It's grounding, almost hypnotic. And yet, a hint of danger lingers. Stray dogs bark, small fires smolder dangerously, and you remember that even simple domesticity in ancient villages carried risks. The night deepens further. From a rooftop, a figure peers down, scanning the streets. Perhaps a young boy, perhaps a guard, perhaps someone curious about your presence. You wonder whether villagers ever contemplated outsiders sneaking through the dark like you are now, or whether they simply accepted the quiet, trusting the rhythm of river, hearth, and sky to keep them safe. You wander past sleeping livestock, the low murmur of animals blending seamlessly with distant water. Every sense is alive. The smell of burning oil, the soft crunch of mud underfoot, the faint rustle of wind through reed mats. Somewhere nearby, a dog yawns loudly. It sounds startlingly human in its melancholy. You realize that even in the simplest corners of the world, life insists on its drama and humor, its anxiety and comfort, and you are only a visitor, tracing steps written long ago that a final glance at the village before you moves on reveals torches still flickering, shadows stretching across the mud walls, and children murmuring dreams into the dark. You inhale, tasting the cool night air thick with smoke, and step away from the hearths, carrying the warmth and whispers with you as the plain widens again. You are alone with the night, yet profoundly not alone at all. The path curls away from the quiet village, and soon your ears catch a different hum altogether, a murmur of voices, punctuated by the clatter of jars and the occasional bray of a donkey. The scent of barley and baked bread thickens the air, mingled with sweat, oil, and the faint tang of fish. You realize you've stumbled upon the beating heart of a Mesopotamian night, the market stirring before dawn. Even in darkness, people here waste no time, trade waits for no sunrise. You step into a wide, packed earth square where vendors are already arranging their goods. Reed baskets bulge with onions and dates. Clay jars filled with beer are set carefully in rows, their stoppers sealed with mud. One man hefts a sheep onto a tether post, the animal bleating indignantly as a buyer inspects its teeth. Children dart through the alleys, balancing small trays of bread cakes, their laughter echoing like mischievous birds. The whole place feels alive, as though the plain itself decided to wake early and stretch its arms. Mainstream history reminds you that these markets were essential, not just for food but for everything. Pots, textiles, tools, amulets, even gossip. They were the arteries of civilization, keeping supplies circulating from village to village, city to city. And yet historians still argue whether these gatherings were primarily economic or social. Were they really about survival? Or were they excuses to mingle, flirt, share news, and compare whose barley field looked greener? As you wander between stalls, the debate feels almost irrelevant. The chatter, the bargaining, the handshakes, all of it is undeniably human. A quirky tidbit rises into your mind. Some tablets from later Mesopotamian cities reveal surprisingly detailed complaints from customers. One man wrote angrily about receiving the wrong grade of copper. Another claimed he'd been sold poor quality barley. Imagine being one of the first Yelp reviewers in history, carving your one-star rant into clay. You grin, passing a trader who haggles so theatrically you'd swear he was auditioning for a play. You pause at a stall where a woman pours beer from a tall jar into smaller clay cups. It froths faintly in the torchlight, earthy and sour-sweet. Workers gather around, sipping with low chuckles, their shoulders loosening as the drink flows. It strikes you that for all its reputation as a staple, beer was also a lubricant for conversation, loosening tongues and softening tempers. One man jokes about marrying off his daughter to the highest bidder of goats, and laughter erupts. You can't tell if he's serious or if she's already plotting her escape. Beyond the laughter, you hear the steady thump of grinders turning grain into flour. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, as though the market itself breathes in steady beats. A donkey, loaded with baskets of salt and dried fish, stomps impatiently, shaking its ears. The smell of fish, pungent and salty, mixes with the warm sweetness of dates and the sharp bite of onions, creating a perfume only Mesopotamia could love. You wrinkle your nose and then laugh. Your future self in a modern supermarket might not fare much better. Clay lamps flicker on low stands, their light dancing across woven mats and painted bowls. Some bowls shimmer faintly, glazed with mineral pigments that catch the flame. You run your hand over the smooth surface, imagining the potter who shaped it, pressing thumb after thumb into clay, then sliding it into a kiln. Each piece is more than a container. It's an echo of hands, of rhythm, of time. At one corner of the square, you see a scribe perched with stylus and tablet, recording transactions. Every sale of sheep, grain, or beer finds its way onto wet clay. You watch as he squints in the low light, scratching wedge marks with a reed stylus. This is commerce crystallized, business receipts that may outlive every person here. And in the distant future, some scholar will puzzle over these marks, piecing together the story of a single night's trade. You brush past a rack of textiles, coarse but colorful, dyed with plants and minerals. A woman runs her hand across the fabric, murmuring approval before slipping a bead necklace from her pouch in exchange. The trade is swift, intimate, more trust than calculation. You wonder how many loves began this way. Eyes meeting over woven cloth, hands brushing as payment changed hands. The voices rise and fall in waves. Someone shouts a price, another counters, and laughter follows. You think of modern flea markets, car boot sales, or even online auctions. It seems humans never outgrew the thrill of haggling. The torchlight makes shadows dance across mud brick walls, and you find yourself swaying with the rhythm of the crowd, half awake, half dreaming. As dawn edges closer, the market only grows livelier. More vendors arrive with donkeys, leading them through the crowd with loud whistles. Someone sets down a cage of squawking geese, their wings flapping frantically. Children run after them, squealing with delight. You nearly trip over a loose mat where copper tools glint. Axes, knives, sickles, all lined up like sleeping soldiers. You stop at a spice stall, inhaling the sharp, peppery scent of ground herbs mixed with resin. The trader explains proudly, or so you imagine, that these came from distant lands, proof that Mesopotamia was already part of a wide, bustling trade network. Somewhere far beyond these rivers, other markets glow under other stars, and goods drift back here like gifts from unseen hands. A torch sputters near you, sending sparks into the night. For a moment you imagine this whole place as fragile as a dream. If the wind blew too hard, the lights would go out, the voices would vanish, and you'd be alone again in silence. But the wind holds steady, the laughter rolls on, and the market thrives. You stand still, letting the pulse of commerce wash over you, and realize this is humanity learning to live together not just as survivors, but as neighbors, partners, dreamers. You step back from the square, heart still thumping with the energy of it all, and watch the silhouettes of merchants sway like shadows in firelight. Soon, the first blush of dawn will edge across the horizon. For now, though, the market hums, eternal, somewhere between dream and waking. You leave the noise of the market behind, and the night air cools around you again, carrying a faint trace of incense. It drifts on the breeze like a whispered invitation, urging you toward the looming shapes that rise against the stars. As you approach, the silhouettes sharpen, step platforms of mud bricks stacked higher and higher, reaching toward the sky. These are Ziggurats, the sacred mountains built by human hands on a flat plain where nature forgot to place real ones. Even in the hush of midnight, their presence is undeniable, solemn, massive, and oddly comforting. You tilt your head back, tracing the levels upward, each terrace catching moonlight in jagged blocks. A staircase cuts through the face like a ladder to the stars, and you half wonder if climbing it at night would bring you closer to answers you're not supposed to hear. These temples are not houses for people, they're houses for gods, dwellings for powers that live simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Priests say the gods descend to the top chambers, resting on beds strewn with fine cloth and food offerings. Whether or not that's true, the air itself feels charged, like standing under static before a storm. Mainstream historians agree that temples here were more than religious centers. They were banks, storehouses, and administrative hubs. In fact, much of the world's first writing was born from temple bookkeeping. But historians still argue whether the sheer scale of these ziggurats was meant to impress people or please deities. Were they spiritual beacons or political billboards, reminding everyone who held power? As you squint up at the enormous steps glowing pale in the starlight, both explanations feel right. A quirky tidbit tickles the back of your mind. Some priests believed statues of the gods literally ate the offerings placed before them. Meals of bread, beer, and meat were left out, and by morning, well, someone had helped the gods finish their dinner. Whether it was priests, temple staff, or opportunistic dogs, the divine appetite never seemed to wane. You chuckle softly. Even gods, apparently, required midnight snacks. Closer now, you hear chanting. Low, rhythmic voices drift down the steps, weaving with the smoke of burning incense. You imagine priests moving in ritual procession, clad in wool garments, their heads shaved smooth, carrying bowls of offerings and clay tablets with lists of supplies. Their chants rise and fall like waves, punctuated by the clang of a bronze gong. The sound settles into your chest, vibrating like a second heartbeat. The air here is rich with scents, frankincense, cedar resin, and the faint musk of animals tethered nearby for sacrifice. Torches line the lower walls, throwing long shadows that stretch across the plaza. You walk between them slowly, careful not to intrude. A group of worshippers kneels at a small shrine on the side, pressing their foreheads to the earth. Their prayers sound like murmurs lost in wind, each voice fragile against the massive structure above. You imagine climbing the staircase, one heavy step after another, your breath shallow in the thin night air. From the top terrace, the plain would unfurl in every direction, rivers glinting faintly. villages glowing with oil lamps, and the sky pressing close with stars. Perhaps that's the real purpose of a ziggurat, not to bring gods down to earth, but to push humans upward, closer to the infinite. You feel that ache, that longing, humming inside your bones. Around the base, you notice storerooms stacked with jars of grain and oil. Priests weren't just spiritual guides, they were accountants, warehouse managers, and sometimes judges. The temple was the community's pantry and bank, and every family owed their share. You imagine scribes scurrying here at dawn, tallying barley harvests, recording debts, and muttering about who still hasn't delivered their goats. In the dark, you can almost hear the scratch of styluses echoing from behind thick mud brick walls. A breeze kicks up, tugging the smoke sideways. For a moment, the scent of cedar is so strong you think you've stepped into a forest. You remember that timber was rare here. Every beam had to be imported, floated downriver from distant mountains. That means every wooden door, every carved beam inside the temple was a luxury, more valuable than gold to those who lived in this treeless land. You run your fingers across a doorframe, feeling the faint ridges of ancient carpentry. The chanting fades, replaced by silence. The priests have retreated inside, leaving only the hiss of torches and the quiet scuffle of night animals. A bat swoops across your path, vanishing into the dark. You pause at the base of the staircase, staring upward, and sense the weight of centuries pressing down. These ziggurats, rebuilt again and again, stood as anchors against time's erosion. Their mud bricks may crumble, but the idea of them endures, that humans can create mountains out of dust, then convince themselves gods live at the top. You step back into the plaza. The air is cooler here, shadows stretching like giant fingers across the ground. Somewhere, a dog howls, and the sound ricochets off the temple walls like an uninvited hymn. You glance once more at the terraces fading into the night sky. The incense smoke coils upward, merging with the stars, as though prayers have finally found a way to escape gravity. And with that, you turn away, carrying the echo of chants in your chest, the smell of cedar in your nose, and the heavy awareness that these towers were both dream and declaration. Heart house of gods, heart house of humans, heart house of ambition itself. You follow a narrow lane leading away from the shadow of the ziggurat. The torches behind you fade, leaving only the silver wash of moonlight to guide your steps. Ahead, a faint scratching sound pricks your ears, steady, rhythmic, insistent. It isn't an animal or the wind. It's sharper, more deliberate, like tiny claws etching the earth. You round a corner and see them, scribes, hunched beneath oil lamps, bent over slabs of wet clay, pressing lines and wedges with reed styluses. The sight is strangely hypnotic. Each stylus stroke is crisp, neat, like a secret code being whispered into stone. Clay tablets lie scattered around, some stacked carefully, others drying on mats. You kneel closer and watch as one scribe carefully records grain tallies. How many baskets from which field, owed by which farmer, delivered to which priest? This is bureaucracy at its birth, humanity's first attempt to turn memory into permanence. Without these scratches, debts vanish, promises dissolve, and authority wobbles. With them, everything hardens, literally, into clay. Mainstream historians emphasize this moment as the dawn of writing. Cuneiform, wedge-shaped impressions, born from simple accounting. And yet historians still argue whether writing first bloomed from trade or from temple ritual. Were humans simply trying to track barley, or were they trying to trap prayers? You listen to the stylus scratching and think both could be true. Humans writing down what they need, but also what they dream. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. Some tablets from later Mesopotamia are basically dear diary entries, filled with complaints about bad neighbors or notes about personal feelings. Imagine inventing writing for grand records of kings and gods, only to have your descendants use it to gossip about who stole whose donkey. You chuckle softly, and the scribes don't even look up, too focused, too lost in the clay to notice. One young scribe pauses to stretch his fingers, then dunks his stylus in water to soften the clay surface. His hands are smudged, nails caked with brown, his back stiff from hours of crouching. You almost feel sorry for him, yet there's pride in his gaze as he sets another finished tablet onto the mat. These aren't just notes, they're survival. Lose track of grain and taxes, and the city itself falters. Each scratch of reed into clay is a heartbeat of civilization. You glance at another scribe's work. Not numbers this time, but words, myths perhaps, or laws, or some royal decree. The lines curve into neat rows, like bricks stacked in text. The lamp flame flickers, and the clay glistens with damp sheen. You imagine, centuries from now, archaeologists dusting off this very tablet, gasping over its survival. The thought makes you shiver. How fragile human memory is. How desperate we are to press it into something solid. Nearby, a teacher scolds an apprentice. The boy fumbles with his stylus, scratching clumsy lines. The teacher snatches the tablet, shaking his head. The boy blushes, muttering, before smoothing the clay flat again and starting over. This is Mesopotamia's version of school. Endless practice, repetition, and the occasional frustrated sigh. You smirk, realizing homework has been haunting humanity for far longer than you imagined. The scent of damp earth mingles with sesame oil from the lamps. Shadows dance across the scribes' faces, making them look older, almost ghost-like. One mutters under his breath as he tallies sheep, his voice barely audible but oddly soothing, like a lullaby of bureaucracy. Another yawns deeply, nearly smudging his work with his sleeve. You realize this isn't glamorous, it's tedious, grinding, backbreaking. Yet it's the tedium that builds worlds. Behind the scribes, shelves of dried tablets line the walls, hundreds stacked like loaves of bread. Some are wrapped in clay envelopes, sealed with cylinder stamps bearing intricate designs. You run your hand along one, feeling the ridges of lions, stars, and bearded faces etched into the surface. These seals are signatures, proof that what's written inside belongs to someone specific. In a world where memory fails and voices fade, these little impressions are trust itself. The night thickens, and a cool draft sneaks through the room. One lamp gutters, then steadies. You watch the scribes continue, relentless, each stroke anchoring their city against the chaos of time. It feels almost holy, this quiet ritual of inkless words. Somewhere outside, a donkey brays, startling one scribe into dropping his stylus. He curses softly under his breath. You smile, reminded that even in the sacred act of writing, humanity never strays far from clumsiness. A cricket chirps nearby, keeping its own rhythm against the scribe's scratching. Together they weave a symphony of order and chance, of permanence and passing. You step back into the night, leaving the glow of lamps behind. The silence feels heavier now, like the clay tablets themselves weigh on your shoulders. Civilization has begun to bind itself with words, and you're caught in its net. Every tally, every myth, every insult carved into clay drifts forward in time, carrying these people's voices into eternity. You walk away with the echo of scratching in your ears, the sound of history writing itself, one wedge at a time. You step back into the winding street, and the lamps of the scribes fade like a constellation behind you. The air shifts, carrying the rich smell of roasted grain, charred onions, and sizzling lamb fat. Your stomach gives a low growl, and you realize the city hasn't gone to bed yet. Not really. Nippur, like every Mesopotamian city, seems to breathe on two lungs. One for the gods, one for the markets. Tonight you follow the second. Ahead, the night bazaar hums with low chatter, laughter, and the soft clink of bronze weights on stone counters. Torches crackle, shadows ripple, and you slip into the current of people moving between stalls. On one table lies a heap of figs, sticky and dark, their sweetness luring flies. Another stall offers clay jars of date syrup, their stoppers smeared with thick amber drips. And right beside it, a woman grinds sesame seeds into oil with the patience of someone who knows this rhythm will never end. Mainstream history tells you Mesopotamian markets were the arteries of the city. Without them, no ziggurat could rise, no temple could feast its gods. Here, grain flowed like currency, dates and barley serving as both food and wage. And yet historians still argue whether barter truly dominated, or whether some form of coin like silver actually circulated more widely than records suggest. You trail a finger along a string of tiny silver rings displayed at a stall and wonder if this was, in fact, the jingle of an ancient wallet. You pause at a pottery merchant's booth. Rows of clay bowls, Jars and jugs gleam in the torchlight, their wet sheen proof they were pulled from the kiln only yesterday. Some are simple and sturdy, others carved with spirals and stamped rosettes. The merchant beams with pride, waving you closer, though you haven't the faintest coin or sheep to trade. Still, you pick up a small jug, its surface etched with zigzags, and the cool clay presses against your palm like a handshake across centuries. A quirky tidbit sneaks into your thoughts. Archaeologists once found ancient Mesopotamian receipts, small tablets recording market purchases, complete with the merchant's seal. So yes, humanity has apparently been annoyed at keeping track of expenses since 3000 BCE. You imagine some poor soul explaining to his wife why the tablet shows 3 extra jugs of beer purchased during a work meeting. Some things never change. The market swells with sound as you drift deeper. A lute twangs lazily in the background, and children chase each other between stalls, nearly toppling baskets of onions. A spice seller waves sprigs of mint beneath your nose, its cool scent slicing through the smoke of roasting fish. Farther down, a brewer stirs a vat of fermenting barley mash, the froth bubbling like a witch's cauldron. He ladles a bit into a clay cup and hands it to a customer, who sips, smacks his lips, and nods approvingly. You can almost taste the sour tang of ancient beer on your tongue, though it's probably closer to a smoothie with a hangover. One corner of the market draws a more hushed crowd. A man sits cross-legged with baskets of amulets and charms, small clay figurines, bronze pendants, beads of carnelian and lapis lazuli. You bend closer and spot a tiny lion carved in stone, its jaws open as if mid-roar. Another figure resembles a squat, wide-eyed demon, perhaps Pazuzu, guardian against evil winds. You wonder whether buyers here believed the charm itself held power, or if it was just a comfort, like carrying a lucky coin. Historians still argue whether magic and religion were separate concepts in Mesopotamia, or whether they were one and the same. A donkey brays again, this time within the market itself, tied near a vegetable stall. Its handler argues with a customer over the price of cucumbers, their voices rising, drawing a small crowd. Someone jokes about the donkey having better sense than either of them, and laughter ripples through the group. You smile. Markets everywhere are theaters of argument, comedy, and survival. The torches spit sparks into the air. A breeze lifts dust, mixing it with the aroma of grilled meat. You wander to a baker's stall, where flatbreads puff against the hot surface of a clay oven. The baker flicks them out with practiced ease, stacking them high in baskets. One boy grabs a warm round, burns his fingers, yelps, then laughs as his friends shove him aside for their turn. The scene is so ordinary it aches with familiarity. You've seen it in street corners half a world away, just millennia later. You pause again, gazing across the bazaar. The mixture of goods seems infinite. Lapis beads from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Oman. The market is more than food and pottery. It is the veins of trade stretching far beyond the horizon. You trace a bead between your fingers and imagine the caravan that carried it here. Camels trudging across desert, sailors clinging to reed boats. The entire world seems to converge in this square of torchlight. And yet, as the hour deepens, something shifts. The chatter softens, the buyers trickle out. Merchants yawn, roll up mats, cover jars, tie down animals. The music fades into silence. One by one, torches gutter and vanish, leaving the bazaar to the crickets and the faint shimmer of stars above. You step back into the quiet street, your ears ringing with the memory of clinking weights, haggled laughter, and the scratch of styluses not far away. The city exhales, the night grows heavier, and you move on, carrying with you the taste of dates, the scent of sesame, and the hum of commerce that built empires. You leave the fading glow of the market behind, your sandals whispering over the packed earth of the street. The smells of roasted grain and smoking torches drift off into memory, replaced by the cooler scent of damp clay. The night air is thicker here, less perfumed by spices and more by the slow exhale of water. You follow the sound, a low, steady rush, like the steady breathing of something immense. The Euphrates lies ahead, glimmering in the moonlight. Its surface is dappled with silver ripples, stretching out into a horizon that never seems to end. You pause at the embankment, where broad stone steps descend into the current. Families and workers gather here even at this late hour. Some fill jars, lowering clay vessels with ropes into the water. Others wash clothes, beating wet fabric against stone, their motions rhythmic and oddly soothing. A boy splashes his younger sister, and she shrieks with laughter, breaking the night's spell for just a moment. You crouch and trail your fingers in the current. The water is cooler than you expect, and it carries fine silt that clings to your skin like memory itself. Mainstream history insists rivers like this were Mesopotamia's lifeblood. Without them, there would be no barley, no dates, no cities at all. The rivers flooded, nourished, and betrayed their people all at once. The very idea of civilization is married to the banks where you kneel. And yet historians still argue whether irrigation was centralized under temples or managed more locally by families. Did priests wield the water like power, or did villagers carve their own canals and claim ownership? You look at the silent, dark water and can't help but think the river probably didn't care either way. You lean back, watching barges moored nearby. Their hulls are built of reed bundles, sealed with bitumen, bobbing like dark shadows against the current. They look fragile, and yet they carry astonishing loads: timber, copper, wool. You imagine standing on one, drifting under the stars, the river carrying you toward distant ports and strange dialects. Travel must have felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The Euphrates was not just water. It was highway, frontier, and sometimes battlefield. A quirky tidbit trickles into your mind. Archaeologists once uncovered clay models of boats in children's graves, suggesting kids may have played with miniature barges the way modern children float toy ships in bathtubs. You picture a Mesopotamian child kneeling at the riverbank, nudging a clay boat into the current, only for it to sink immediately, proof that frustration with toy design is a cross-cultural constant. Your eyes adjust further to the moonlight, and you spot silhouettes of fishermen casting nets. They move silently, like shadows made flesh, heaving the nets into the dark and then waiting. A splash, a grunt, and the net is drawn back, wriggling with life. The fish glitter like fragments of broken stars. One fisherman hums under his breath, the tune so low and steady that it blends with the river's own voice. You imagine him doing the same thing every night, his song carried down the water for centuries. The riverbank, however, is not entirely serene. You hear a croak, then another, until a full chorus of frogs builds around you, their rhythm chaotic, yet somehow soothing. Reeds rustle as unseen creatures slip through them. You half expect to see crocodiles lurking, jaws wide, though that's more of a Nile problem than a Euphrates one. Still, the thought makes you scoot a bit farther up the embankment. No harm in caution. Families slowly drift away, carrying their jars balanced on heads or strapped against backs. One woman steadies a massive jug as though it were light as a feather, while her son carries a smaller vessel, wobbling under its weight. You realize this simple act, fetching water, was repeated countless times each day, for every household. No taps, no faucets, just bare feet and heavy jars. Civilization might look grand in textbooks, but it was built on sore shoulders and calloused palms. You stroll along the bank now, past reeds that sway and rustle. The moon reflects in broken shards across the water, and the night feels infinite. You pause near a shrine tucked into the embankment, a small stone altar smeared with offerings. A few reeds tied together, a lump of bread, and what looks like a clay figurine. Perhaps a prayer for safe passage across the river, or for a flood that arrives on time. The Euphrates was generous, but also cruel. Too much water could drown fields, while too little left them cracked and barren. You imagine farmers staring at the river each spring, their futures rising and falling with its tide. Historians still argue whether the unpredictable floods here contributed to the Mesopotamian worldview, the sense that gods were capricious, the universe unstable. You look at the restless current and think, yes, that tracks. This river does not promise peace, it promises change, and whether that change is blessing or disaster is anyone's guess. You lean against a stone wall, letting the river's song fill your ears. You think about how much of human history has been spent simply watching water, gauging its level, fearing its rage, whispering to it as though it could hear. Somewhere upriver, someone else may be looking at this same moonlit current, wondering the same things. The idea ties you to strangers you'll never meet, across both time and distance. The night grows later. Nets are pulled in for the last time. Jars are hoisted, shrines abandoned until dawn. The frogs continue their chorus, and the river keeps flowing, utterly indifferent to your presence. You linger one last moment, listening. The Euphrates whispers nothing clearly, and yet somehow tells you everything. You peel yourself away from the river's hypnotic murmur, stepping back into narrow alleys that wind between mud brick walls. The streets here are quieter than the market lanes, but far from empty. Light spills from doorways where families still sit awake. You catch the faint aroma of baking bread, flat rounds slapped against the inner walls of clay ovens. The smell is warm, nutty, and comforting, almost enough to convince you that sneaking a midnight snack from a stranger's kitchen is a good idea. Don't worry, you resist. Barely. As you wander deeper, the air thickens with smoke and chatter. Neighborhoods in Mesopotamian cities were not sterile grids, but living, breathing hives of sound. Voices carry across rooftops, children shout as they chase each other through alleys, and dogs bark at shadows that don't deserve it. One household sings softly while grinding grain, the hum of stone against stone keeping time like a heartbeat. Your sandals crunch against clay fragments scattered across the street. Houses loom close, their walls leaning in as though they might gossip if you linger. Each home is built from the same mud brick, but small differences catch your eye. Some doors are painted with streaks of ochre, others are reinforced with wooden beams. A few thresholds bear little protective charms, clay plaques impressed with symbols of household gods. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Mesopotamian homes often centered around a courtyard. That open space served as kitchen, workshop, and living room all at once. Privacy wasn't exactly the neighborhood specialty. Family life was laid bare in the hum of those courtyards. You imagine mothers kneading dough, fathers repairing tools, children squabbling over toys made of reeds. The walls of each home were not barriers so much as thin membranes, leaking laughter, arguments, and prayers into the street. You pass a doorway where a woman sprinkles water onto the ground before stepping inside. Quirky tidbit: some Mesopotamians believed in household demons, protectors if appeased, pests if ignored. Pouring water or setting out crumbs of bread was a way to keep them calm. You glance around, half expecting a mischievous little shadow to peek from a rooftop, grinning. None appears, but the thought makes the night feel more alive. As you move on, the streets grow tighter. The walls almost brush your shoulders, and you realize how compact city life really was. Historians still argue whether these neighborhoods were organized by profession, bakers beside bakers, potters beside potters, or whether they were simply chaotic clusters. Either way, the result is the same: a labyrinth of lives pressed close together, weaving a fabric of humanity stronger than any temple wall. You pause at a house where voices spill out in waves. Laughter, clapping, and the faint ring of a lyre. Curious, you peer through the open doorway. Inside, a family shares an evening meal. Bowls of lentil stew, flatbread stacked like parchment sheets, and dates sticky with sweetness cover a low table. The father plucks at a stringed instrument while his daughter dances in the dim light, her shadow stretching along the wall. For a fleeting moment, the centuries collapse, and you could almost be at a family party in your own neighborhood. The only difference is the lack of Wi-Fi, and honestly, that might be a blessing. Children dart in and out of the house, one holding a carved clay toy that looks suspiciously like a lion with wheels. You smile, realizing that bedtime resistance is apparently universal. Parents sigh, children plead for 5 more minutes, and the argument is as old as civilization itself. Some things never change. The night deepens, and fewer lights shine from the windows. Families drift into sleep, but the streets are far from empty. You spot a group of men seated on a rooftop, deep in conversation. Smoke curls from their pipes, blending with the stars above. Maybe they're discussing grain prices, maybe gossiping about the temple priests, or maybe debating whose donkey is the strongest. The details don't matter. The rhythm of their talk is what lingers. Community thrives in these small, constant rituals. You duck into a wider square where several lanes meet. Here, a public oven glows faintly, its coals dying down for the night. Women gather around it earlier in the day to bake bread, turning flour into sustenance for the neighborhood. Now the oven rests, its clay mouth glowing like the last ember of the day. You place your hand near it and feel a soft warmth, like a lingering memory. Another small detail catches your eye. At the corner of the square stands a clay drain, leading runoff water out toward the river. Mesopotamian cities, contrary to the dusty stereotype, did have systems to manage waste and water. They weren't perfect, but they kept the chaos at bay. You imagine rain rushing through those drains, carrying mud and scraps away. The sound must have been a familiar comfort in a world that balanced on the edge of order and flood. Your path twists once more, carrying you past shuttered doors and silent alleys. A stray cat darts ahead, its tail flashing like a comet. You follow for a few steps before it disappears into the shadows. Somewhere above, a window creaks open. A woman leans out, shaking a rug over the street, unaware or unconcerned about the hour. Dust drifts like golden mist in the moonlight. You breathe it all in. The bread smoke, the faint scent of dung fires, the warmth of clay walls that stored the day's heat. This is not the grandeur of temples or the vast sweep of rivers. This is the heartbeat of the city, the neighborhoods where people laughed, prayed, and quarreled in equal measure. Civilization doesn't only rise in palaces. It lives here, in alleys so narrow you can touch both walls at once, in kitchens fragrant with stew, in songs hummed on rooftops. You realize the night is thinning. Some houses are dark now, their doors barred. But in the hush, you can still hear faint murmurs of dreams drifting through thin walls. The neighborhood exhales, folding itself into sleep, and you drift forward with it. The air shifts as you step out from the clustered houses into the open stretch of earth that leads to the farmland beyond the city's walls. The rhythm of the neighborhoods fades behind you, replaced by a different music, fields whispering in the midnight breeze, irrigation ditches trickling like sleepy veins, and the occasional croak of frogs perched in shallow pools. The sky feels wider here, an unbroken canvas of stars pressing down on the land that has always been called fertile for good reason. You tread along the edge of a canal, the moonlight shimmering across its surface. This is no natural stream. It's the product of backbreaking work. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian farmers engineered extensive irrigation systems thousands of years ago, guiding the unpredictable floods of the Tigris and Euphrates into canals, ditches, and basins. Without those channels, crops would scorch or drown. With them, barley, wheat, onions, and dates thrived, feeding empires before empires even had proper names. You squat near the canal, touching the damp clay. It clings to your fingers, sticky and rich, smelling faintly of minerals and waterlogged roots. Imagine working this soil day after day, knowing the success of your harvest decides whether your family eats or starves. Farming here wasn't a hobby. It was survival at its most mathematical. Plant too early, and the seeds drown in floodwater. Plant too late, and the scorching sun burns them to ash. Talk about stressful gardening. As you walk, a quirky tidbit pops into your head. Some Mesopotamian farmers trained pigs to stomp grain from its husk. Picture that, a herd of snorting, muddy pigs joyfully trampling your crop while you stand by, clapping like a proud coach. Forget modern tractors. This was the original pig power. Your sandals crunch against dry reeds scattered along the canal bank. Ahead, you notice torches glowing faintly. A handful of farmers still work by night, bending over the fields with hoes, guiding water into trenches with wooden shovels. You hear them muttering, not curses, but calculations. How long before this ditch fills? How much water can they afford to let through before the canal runs dry? Historians still argue whether this level of irrigation management required centralized authority from the start, or whether local families handled it themselves before kings swooped in to claim credit. Either way, someone always had to get their feet muddy. You pause beside a barley field. The stalks sway, pale gold in the moonlight, almost like a frozen sea. You close your eyes and let the wind carry the faint rustle, as if the earth itself is sighing. Somewhere in that sound lies the secret of civilization: surplus grain. Enough to store, enough to trade, enough to free up one neighbor to become a potter, another to become a soldier, and another, lucky them, to become a storyteller. Out here, the city seems far away, yet its pulse is still tethered to these fields. You picture temple scribes recording grain rations on clay tablets, their neat wedge marks ensuring no farmer can sneak off without paying dues. Imagine a young boy grumbling as he learns to write the symbol for barley for the 100th time, wishing he could just be stomping it with pigs instead. The irony isn't lost on you. Scribes might have invented writing for taxes before poetry. That's bureaucracy for you. The ground shifts as you step off the path, your feet sinking slightly into softer soil. You spot rows of date palms planted neatly along a ridge. Their tall silhouettes rise like watchtowers against the night sky. Sweet clusters dangle above, heavy with sugar. You can't resist the thought. Dates were the ancient Mesopotamian candy. Energy-packed, portable, and sticky enough to glue your fingers together. Somewhere, a child was probably sneaking extra handfuls while their parents pretended not to notice. A breeze shifts again, carrying a new sound, frogs croaking in chorus. You follow it to a marshy corner where water collects in a small pond. The reflection of stars ripples as frogs leap, insects buzz, and reeds sway like curtains. It's oddly peaceful, though you remember that such marshes were also breeding grounds for mosquitoes. No bug spray, no citronella candles, just you, the frogs, and itchy misery. Another reason ancient farmers probably prayed so often. You move toward the darker edge of the farmland, where boundary stones jut from the soil. These markers are carved with inscriptions, declaring ownership by gods or kings. Cross them without permission, and you risk more than your neighbor's anger. You risk curses. Some of those inscriptions promise divine punishment, from crop failure to personal misfortune. Basically, trespassers will be hexed. You chuckle, imagining modern real estate signs reading, "This lot blessed by Enlil. Break ground, and may your coffee always be cold." Beyond the boundary, wild grasses reclaim the earth. Civilization bleeds into wilderness. The difference between ordered field and untamed land is sharp, almost theatrical under moonlight. And yet, this balance between human control and nature's chaos is what defines Mesopotamia. Every ditch dug, every seed planted, is a gamble against the unpredictable moods of water and sky. You crouch again, scooping up a handful of soil. It crumbles in your palm, carrying the weight of millennia. Farmers bent their backs here long before you, long before your grandparents, long before anyone even thought of the word history. The land remembers. The torches in the distance dim, and the farmers finally retreat, leaving the night to its quieter inhabitants. Owls sweep low, their wings whispering above the fields. Somewhere in the reeds, a jackal yips, reminding you that not all creatures are as harmless as frogs and pigs. Yet the stillness doesn't feel threatening. It feels eternal, as though these farmlands have been waiting for you to walk them at midnight, to listen, to carry the sound of barley rustling in your memory. The city's hum calls faintly behind you, but you linger one last moment, letting your eyes wander across the canal, the palms, the patient earth. Civilization may have started in temples, but it was kept alive in these quiet fields, where ordinary hands shaped the extraordinary future. You wander back through the faint outline of the city, its torchlight glimmering, but instead of turning toward the noise of the market, you angle toward the hulking shapes of walls and gates. They rise ahead of you, immense and solemn, like sleeping giants hunched protectively around the people inside. Up close, you can see how the mud brick bulges and crumbles, patched and repatched by countless hands. Rain and flood tried to undo them every year, but the walls endured, because if they didn't, neither would the city. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian cities like Uruk, Babylon, and Nineveh were all surrounded by defensive walls. These were among humanity's earliest massive fortifications, built of sun-baked brick reinforced with timber and stone. The walls didn't just protect from invaders, they announced power. A city with strong walls said, "We're serious. Don't even try." You run your hand across the rough surface, feeling the grit rub into your palm. Imagine stacking millions of bricks in relentless sun, no cranes, no power tools, just ropes, scaffolding, and aching shoulders. Historians still argue whether the first walls were built primarily for defense, or whether they also served as psychological theater, more intimidation than barricade. Either way, you'd have been grateful for them if you were sleeping inside at night. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some Mesopotamian inscriptions bragged about the size of the city walls almost like ancient flexes. Kings recorded measurements down to the cubit, practically saying, "Our walls are thicker than your walls." Imagine modern politicians competing on how wide their highways are. Same energy, different century. You pause beneath a gate arch. Its bricks cool in the midnight air. The arch is low, forcing you to bow slightly. That wasn't an accident. Architects designed entrances to make visitors feel smaller, a subtle reminder of the city's power. Torches burn on either side, smoke curling upward into the night. Somewhere, a guard coughs. Through the gate, a stretch of road leads out into darker land, where desert and rival city-states loom. Standing here, you feel the weight of vulnerability. Without these walls, raiders could sweep in, taking grain, cattle, and maybe you. With them, you at least had the illusion of safety. Still, safety was never guaranteed. Armies didn't politely knock. They built siege ramps, dug tunnels, and occasionally just waited for hunger to do the work. The irony of walls, they kept enemies out, but they also trapped you in. Above your head, the walls stretch higher than you expect, almost menacing against the starlight. You tilt your neck until it aches. The surface is jagged, dotted with battlements where archers once stood. Imagine leaning on that edge, bow in hand, hoping your shot would actually reach the enemy below instead of flopping uselessly like a thrown stick. No pressure, right? Just civilization depending on your aim. You lean back, sighing. Then, a flash of memory. Remember those pigs stomping grain in the fields? Picture them somehow enlisted in wall defense, squealing and charging at attackers. Ridiculous, but in a way, every scrap of city life was connected to these defenses. Farmers grew food to feed builders. Builders stacked bricks for soldiers. Soldiers guarded the farmers. It was an unbreakable circle, bound by mud brick and sweat. The torch flickers, and you step out along the base of the wall, where shadows pool. You notice small graffiti scratched into bricks, simple symbols, crude drawings, maybe the oldest street art. Someone carved a little figure with arms raised, like they were flexing. Another scratched what looks like a boat. The wall wasn't just defense, it was also a canvas for ordinary voices. You stop at a corner where the wall meets a tower. Its silhouette looms, square and blunt, not beautiful but effective. From here, you can imagine scouts peering out over plains, squinting into the horizon. They weren't looking for stars, they were scanning for dust clouds. A rising column of dust meant hooves, wheels, danger. That's a sobering thought. How often did someone's heart race at a false alarm? Just a herd of wild asses, not an invading army. Oops. Your steps crunch over gravel scattered at the wall's base. In the silence, you feel the enormity of being enclosed. Inside these walls, life pulsed. Temples, markets, gossip, love, arguments, births, deaths. Outside, wilderness waited, and the wall stood between, a literal line drawn across the earth. Civilization on one side, uncertainty on the other. You place both hands flat on the brick, pressing gently. The wall doesn't move, of course. It's stubborn. But for a moment, you swear it hums, like it's storing echoes of every cry, every cheer, every pounding hammer it has absorbed. The bricks are not silent. They're storytellers in disguise. The night breeze tugs at your tunic, and you tilt your face up one last time. Somewhere beyond these walls, rival kings were sharpening ambitions, priests were muttering curses, and traders were plotting routes. But here, pressed against the rough skin of the wall, you feel strangely safe, as though the ancient city is hugging you close, whispering, "Rest. We've got you covered." The walls recede behind you as you follow a narrow path sloping down toward the river's glimmer. The Euphrates lies ahead, dark and silver, winding like a giant snake basking in the moonlight. You pause at the edge, inhaling that unmistakable river smell, muddy, fertile, with a hint of fish and reeds. The water laps lazily at the bank, and for a moment it feels like the heartbeat of the entire land. Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian civilization depended utterly on rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates were lifelines, bringing water to irrigate fields, carrying boats loaded with goods, and depositing silt that nourished crops. Without them, the region's great cities could never have existed. The rivers were both blessing and curse, since floods sometimes wiped out entire villages. You crouch, running your fingers through the wet mud, cool against your skin. Imagine being a farmer anxiously watching the water level rise each spring. Too little flood, and your fields starve. Too much, and your hut floats downstream. Historians still argue whether the unpredictable floods shaped Mesopotamian religion. Did people imagine their gods as moody and temperamental because their rivers behaved the same way? Hard to prove, but the theory flows nicely. Quirky tidbit. Clay tablets reveal that some ancient boatmen actually kept river curses ready. Short chants muttered against anyone who tried to cheat them or splash water into their cargo. Yes, even then, sailors had attitude. You picture one glaring over his shoulder, grumbling a spell like a magical Yelp review. The water reflects torchlight from distant docks. You hear the creak of wooden boats tied along the bank, their ropes groaning as the current pulls. Flat-bottomed barges, reed coracles, and heavy merchant vessels all bob together, like a floating parking lot from 4,000 years ago. The thought makes you grin. Ancient traffic jams, but on water. You step carefully onto a small dock, its planks uneven beneath your sandals. A boatman dozes nearby, head tipped back, snoring softly. His or rests across his lap. If you woke him, he'd ferry you across for a handful of grain or a scrap of silver. But tonight you don't need to cross. You're here to drift, to listen. The river whispers constantly, ripples kissing wood, fish splashing briefly, reeds sighing in the breeze. You close your eyes and let it wash through you. Time blurs. Suddenly you're not a modern wanderer imagining the past. You're in it. You can feel the pull of water, the urgency of farmers praying upstream, the hopes of merchants loading jars of dates downstream. You imagine a procession of boats gliding by. Some are piled with wool, their decks sagging under heavy bundles. Others carry pottery clinking softly together. A few even host animals, bleating sheep stuffed nervously into corners, not thrilled about their river cruise. A donkey brays, startling a few ducks into the air. Civilization is messy, but it floats. The moon hovers overhead, painting the current in silver streaks. You lean on a post, staring at that reflection, and realize the river was also a map. Follow it far enough south, and you'd reach the Persian Gulf, gateway to trade with India and beyond. Sail north, and you'd find new settlements hugging its banks, eager to claim a piece of fertile land. Every journey began and ended on this water, and yet, the river could turn cruel. You picture sudden floods roaring down, swallowing huts, scattering animals, and forcing families to scramble onto rooftops. Imagine clinging to a palm tree, cursing the gods, while your neighbor floats by on an upside-down bed. Joking aside, floods killed, and they taught humility. The water gave life, but it never promised mercy. A frog croaks. You laugh softly. Even here, in the cradle of civilization, frogs still dominate night riverside concerts. Some things never change. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier in the journey and shiver. Better hope none of that washes into the river upstream. You kneel again, cupping a handful of water, letting it trickle back. The droplets catch moonlight like tiny stars, each one older than you, each one part of an endless cycle of rain, flood, irrigation, and thirst. Somewhere, a priest probably claimed he could command the river with prayers, but standing here, you know the truth. The river listened only to itself. Your body sways with the current, lulled into a sleepy rhythm. The river is not just geography, it's lullaby. You could almost curl up on this dock and drift off. If you do, the boatman might shove you into a corner of his barge and charge rent. That'd be awkward in the morning. So instead, you rise, dusting mud from your hands, and cast one last look at the shimmering expanse. It stretches endlessly into the dark, promising both riches and ruin, like a fickle partner you can't live without. Then you turn back toward the path, carrying the sound of rushing water inside you like a heartbeat. You climb back up from the riverbank, your feet pressing into the packed earth, when you notice a faint glow on the horizon. It's not dawn yet, but the stars seem dimmer, as if swallowed by smoke. You smell it first, charred wood, bitter herbs, something sharp in the air that tickles your nose. A fire is burning somewhere within the city, though not the kind that cooks bread or warms hands. This one feels ritualistic, deliberate, sacred, mainstream fact. In Mesopotamia, fire played a central role in both daily life and religion. Hearths kept families alive, hills baked pottery and bricks, and sacred flames burned in temples to honor the gods. Archaeologists have uncovered clay incense burners shaped like animals, their hollow bodies filled with smoldering herbs to carry prayers skyward. You follow the scent, weaving between mud brick alleys until you reach a wide courtyard. In its center stands a raised stone pit, flames dancing inside, sparks lifting like restless spirits. A small group gathers around, their silhouettes flickering, robes glowing orange at the edges. They chant softly, their voices rising and falling like the crackle of the fire itself. Historians still argue whether these open-air rituals were communal offerings to city gods or smaller ceremonies tied to households or guilds. Some scholars think entire neighborhoods shared sacred fires, tended night and day, like eternal guardians of the community. Others imagine secret rites, private oaths sworn in the dark, sealed with smoke. Quirky tidbit: Mesopotamians sometimes burned offerings of beer. Yes, the beloved barley brew wasn't always for drinking. It could be poured onto flames to please thirsty deities. You picture a priest solemnly tipping a jug into the fire while onlookers groan at the waste. Imagine setting your Friday night pint ablaze and calling it devotion. The flames lick higher, illuminating clay tablets stacked on a nearby table. Not ordinary records, ritual instructions etched by temple scribes. One tablet shows neat lines of cuneiform, each wedge marking a word of power. Whispered beside the fire, they become more than symbols. They become spells, or so believers thought. A priest raises a bundle of reeds tied with cord. He dips it into a bowl of oil, then thrusts it into the pit. The reeds flare instantly, flinging sparks into the night. You flinch, the heat brushing your skin. The group chants louder, their cadence hypnotic, like waves crashing in a rhythm older than memory. You glance up. The stars above tremble in the haze. Smoke carries prayers skyward, or perhaps drags them sideways, curling into hidden corners of the world. You wonder, did the gods actually inhale these fumes? Or was it just human longing, burning itself into the air? The ceremony shifts. A woman steps forward with a small clay figurine, crudely shaped into the form of a man. She lowers it into the flames. The clay blackens, cracks, and finally collapses into glowing shards. The crowd murmurs. Was it a curse, a symbolic death? Or perhaps just a reminder that all things, kings, huts, dreams, eventually crumble into ash? You think back to earlier nights, to temples and ziggurats, and realize how many layers of fire existed in this city. The fire of the potter's kiln, turning soft clay into vessels that carried water and wine. The fire of the smith, hammering bronze into weapons and tools. The fire of the home, where children warmed their hands on chilly nights. And this fire, the sacred blaze, eating sacrifices, bridging humans and gods. Another bundle of reeds goes in. The sparks remind you of fireflies, dancing briefly before vanishing into the dark. Someone coughs, someone laughs nervously. Even in ritual, people can't resist being human. Then you hear a sound that prickles your neck, a whispered curse, sharp and bitter, directed not to the heavens, but against a neighbor. Fire, it seems, was also the perfect accomplice for grudges. Imagine muttering about the guy who borrowed your goat and never returned it, then tossing his name into the flames for divine payback. Ancient petty drama, sanctified by smoke. The ceremony quiets. Embers settle into a dull red glow. The priest spreads his hands, dismissing the crowd. People slip away into alleys, their sandals crunching grit. Soon, only the crackle of cooling wood remains. You step closer to the pit. The heat lingers, but the fire has softened, like a beast tamed after its roar. You stare into the embers, each one a miniature sun, each one a reminder of transformation. Clay hardened, food cooked, offerings consumed. Fire doesn't give without taking. You extend your palms, warming them for a moment, and feel that ancient connection. Thousands of years later, fire still hypnotizes us. Staring at flames remains one of the simplest, oldest meditations. The glow slows your heartbeat, blurs your thoughts, until the line between you and the past flickers, thins, nearly vanishes. A soft wind brushes smoke into your hair. You cough lightly, smile, and step back. Somewhere behind you, an owl hoots. The night reasserts itself, cool and quiet, except for the lingering hiss of dying embers. You carry the scent with you as you turn away, the smell of ash and memory, fire and faith. You wander deeper into the maze of alleys, guided now by sound rather than scent. Drums throb faintly in the distance, joined by the wail of a reed flute. The rhythm tugs at your steps, pulling you toward the beating heart of the city at night. You round a corner and find yourself at the edge of a broad courtyard, where lanterns sway from ropes and clusters of people gather. Mesopotamian nightlife, you realize, is anything but sleepy. Mainstream fact: ancient cities like Ur and Babylon didn't shut down when the sun set. Archaeological evidence shows bustling night markets, taverns serving beer, and open-air gatherings where stories, music, and games thrived. The Mesopotamian calendar even scheduled festivals that ran through entire nights, blending commerce with ritual. You slip into the crowd. To one side, merchants hawk skewers of roasted lamb, smoke curling up into the starry dark. Children dart between stalls, laughing, their sandals slapping dust. At the center, performers command attention, a drummer pounding a steady beat, dancers swirling with scarves that catch the lantern light, flickering like flames. You feel the bass reverberate in your chest. Quirky tidbit: Mesopotamians were enthusiastic board gamers. The royal game of Ur, with its decorated squares and racing tokens, was as beloved then as chess or Monopoly are today. Imagine someone shouting at their friend for cheating, only instead of flipping the board they knock over an entire clay beer jug. History has always had sore losers. Nearby, you spot a group hunched over a game board etched into the ground itself. Small pebbles serve as pieces, clattering when they're moved. The players mutter, shake fists, then burst out laughing. You recognize the look, it's timeless. Competition spiced with friendship, or maybe friendship spiced with competition. Music surges again. A flute trills, high and sharp, almost bird-like. Women clap in rhythm, their bracelets jingling. A man leaps into the circle, spinning, his robe flaring like a sail. The crowd cheers, and you realize, joy is as ritualistic here as fire and sacrifice. Festivals aren't just worship, they're survival. They remind people why life is worth enduring in a world that can flood, burn, or crumble without warning. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian taverns were family-friendly gathering spots or rough dives frequented by soldiers and laborers. Some tablets describe them as cheerful houses of beer, others warn of shady dealings and brawls. You imagine both were true, depending on where you stumbled in. Tonight, though, this courtyard feels safe, lit with laughter and song. You edge closer to a vendor who pours thick, frothy beer from a clay jug into wide bowls. He hands them to patrons who drink through long straws made of reeds. You try to picture modern friends sharing a bowl with straws at a bar. Actually, that sounds like a TikTok trend waiting to happen. A young boy rushes past carrying a tray of dates and nuts. He offers them to you, and you take one. The sweetness bursts on your tongue, sticky, rich, balancing the smoky tang of roasted meat in the air. Food, music, laughter, all senses engaged. Then, amid the revelry, you notice a small knot of people off to the side. They sit cross-legged around a storyteller, who gestures wildly, voice rising and falling. His audience leans in, caught in the spell of words. You edge close enough to catch fragments. Tales of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality. Tales of gods who wept or raged. Tales of cities swallowed by flood. Quirky twist: storytellers sometimes dramatized myths with props, masks, puppets, or even trained animals. Picture a goat wandering on stage mid-epic, chewing on the hero's cloak, while the storyteller pretends it's part of the plot. Crowd pleaser every time. You listen, lulled by cadence. The myths you heard earlier at the temple return now in human voices, softer, shaped for amusement rather than awe. The gods here feel closer, more like characters in a soap opera than distant rulers. Someone in the crowd gasps at a plot twist. Someone else mutters they've heard it before, and the storyteller shoots them a glare that transcends time. The drums pick up again. The courtyard roars with applause. Dancers rejoin, the fire pots are refueled, and the festival continues. But you sense fatigue in your limbs. You've walked miles, seen wonders, carried scents and sounds in your head until they've become heavy. Still, you don't want to leave just yet. There's something addictive about standing in this living, breathing night, surrounded by the heartbeat of a civilization that refuses to sleep. You tilt your head back. The smoke, the lanterns, the faint shimmer of stars, all swirl together into a mosaic of light. The music softens for a moment, then swells again, and you realize this city, for all its fears of floods, wars, and angry gods, knew how to throw a party. You smile. Maybe this is the real secret of survival, keeping joy alive between disasters. The music lingers in your ears long after you leave the courtyard, fading into a gentle hum that blends with the night air. You walk slowly now, each step cushioned by dust, every sense slightly dulled by the warmth of food and the rhythm of drums still echoing in your chest. The city is quieter here, away from the lanterns and revelers. You drift toward the edges of the settlement, where the walls meet the desert beyond. The night sky above is enormous. Stars pierce the dark with a sharp clarity, scattered like beads spilled from a broken necklace. You pause, looking upward, and realize how many Mesopotamians must have stood here thousands of years ago, staring at the same sky and asking the same questions. Who placed those stars? What do their patterns mean? And why does the universe feel both comforting and terrifying at once? Mainstream fact: Mesopotamian astronomers were some of the first to systematically track the heavens. They recorded lunar phases, predicted eclipses, and divided the circle into 360 degrees, an invention that still shapes how you measure angles today. It's humbling to think that your geometry homework owes its existence to some ancient stargazer scribbling notes on clay. You notice a small group ahead, priests perhaps, carrying tablets and styluses. They're murmuring, pointing at the sky, carefully noting the alignment of stars near the horizon. To them, astronomy and astrology are the same. Every flicker of light a message from the gods, every planetary movement a hint of human fate. You catch a fragment of their chant, something about the planet Venus rising. Venus, the bright star of Inanna, goddess of love and war. One planet, two wildly different moods. Honestly, that's relatable. Quirky tidbit: Mesopotamian astronomers didn't have telescopes, but they still gave vivid names to stars and constellations. One was the jaw of the bull, another the old man. Somewhere in that glittering chaos, they mapped stories, just as people still do when pointing out Orion or the Big Dipper. Human imagination can turn dots of light into warriors, animals, or cosmic soap operas. You sit on a low wall, listening to the faint scratching of styluses on clay. The air feels cooler now, brushing your skin with desert crispness. A donkey brays in the distance. A dog yaps once, then settles down. The sounds of the city quiet, as if all of Mesopotamia exhales together after a long day. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian star watching was driven more by practical farming needs, tracking seasons for planting, or by sheer fascination with the divine. Perhaps it was both. After all, survival and curiosity often share the same sky. You tilt your head back again. The Milky Way stretches faintly across the dark, a pale smear of light. You imagine some scribe centuries ago pointing at it, deciding it must be a heavenly river, mirroring the Euphrates below. The symmetry is striking. Earth and sky, river and stars, life and myth, all echo each other in Mesopotamia. The longer you gaze, the heavier your eyelids become. The city behind you quiets further, its lanterns winking out one by one. The drums have stilled, the laughter faded, the storytellers gone home to rest their voices. Even the priest's whispers grow faint, as if the night itself has decided to sleep. You are left with only the cool breath of wind and the silent company of stars. And here, under this sky, your journey through midnight Mesopotamia begins to fade, too. You've walked the markets, traced shadows in temples, followed scribes and merchants, gods and dancers. You've seen joy and fear, ritual and chaos, all woven together by the thread of survival. Now, the final stitch is simple silence. 300-word wind down. So now, as the last echoes of the city drift away, let your breathing slow. Picture the vast Mesopotamian sky above you, its stars shimmering like a gentle ceiling of light. Each constellation is steady, unhurried, patiently glowing, reminding you that time flows wider and calmer than any river. The desert air is cool on your skin, soft as a blanket pulled close. The lanterns of the city are nearly gone, their warmth replaced by the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat. Imagine yourself lying down on smooth, worn stone at the edge of the walls. Beneath you, the earth is solid and dependable. Above you, the stars keep their quiet watch. The bustle of markets and the pulse of drums are far away now, softened into memory, as if wrapped in cotton. With every exhale, tension melts from your body. Your shoulders sink, your hands unclench, your thoughts drift slower. Let the silence grow comfortable. Let it carry you gently, like the Euphrates carrying its waters to the sea. The Mesopotamians believed the gods spoke through stars and dreams. Whether or not that's true, tonight you can imagine the sky leaning close, whispering not omens, but comfort. There's nothing more you need to do. No calculations, no journeys, no stories. Just rest. So, let the soft night surround you. Let the ancient city fade, and let your mind wander where it chooses, toward dreamscapes shaped by rivers, by temples, by music long vanished but never forgotten. The world is quiet. You are safe. Sleep comes easily here, in the stillness of Mesopotamia's midnight.